The succession of events experienced either by one individual or a whole community shape history. Each event can be seen as a link in a long and unlimited chain that grows with the hours, days, and years. One way to understand our present is to look back at history and review its origins, connections, and how each moment defined and affected our lives. Today, we will go over the events and situations that have shaped our recent history and will remain in our memories forever. Even events that are not yet resolved. The world entered 2019 with great enthusiasm. It was the last year of the decade. In China, the Year of the Pig was celebrated. In Mexico, the 100-year anniversary of revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. And for the UN, 2019 was the International Year of Indigenous Languages. But none of those titles came close to describing what 2019 would bring. In the streets of some South American countries, the same scene was being repeated. Hundreds of thousands of people were protesting. Their motives were diverse, but they had one objective in common: to achieve better living conditions. In Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia, the demands were being felt. But there was one protest that caught the world's attention: the social explosion in Chile. On October the 14th, 2019, hundreds of students decided to evade paying the subway fare in the capital, Santiago de Chile, in protest against a government-declared increase of its cost. The demonstration started peacefully, but it soon turned violent. Several of the city's subway stations were destroyed. In other regions of Chile, the protests were replicated. People's frustration was felt strongly. The government was forced to declare a state of emergency. "11 days after the protests began, on October the 25th, one of the largest marches in Chilean history took place. More than 1 million people flooded the streets of Santiago. Now, the demands of the population were not only against the rise in fares, but they also called for profound changes in pension policies, improved health and education systems, and the drafting of a new constitution.
Si la ciudadanía así lo decide, avanzaremos hacia una nueva constitución, la primera elaborada en plena democracia.
The social explosion in Chile had not found its end. By July 2020, citizens continued to express their discontent with the policies of President Sebastián Piñera's government. The lockdowns that were implemented due to the coronavirus pandemic meant that fighting decreased, but the flames that ignited it are still alive. The demands of the Chilean people in 2019 raised the temperature in the streets. But in the rest of the world, it was Mother Nature. The temperatures recorded around the world during the month of July 2019 were the highest in history. Extreme heat waves, intense droughts and fires were reported in several places around the world. In the United Kingdom, thermometers registered over 38 degrees Celsius, while in France, Belgium, Germany, Luxembourg and the Netherlands, temperatures above 40 degrees were felt. But the worst was yet to come. In the heart of South America, part of the Amazon basin, the largest rainforest in the world, began to burn beyond control. From January to August 2019, more than 74,000 fires were recorded in the region. The intense drought, heavy winds and deforestation combined with high temperatures to create a devastating scene. According to data provided by Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, the area ravaged by the fires was estimated at more than 29,000 square kilometers. To help keep the fires at bay and lessen the economic impact, the country received about $62 million in donations from the United Kingdom, Canada, the G7 group, and commercial firms and personalities such as Louis Vuitton and Leonardo DiCaprio. The magnitude of the fires in the Amazon rainforest caused alarm globally.
The Amazon is such a key to addressing the climate crisis and the ecological crisis, so that is incredibly important. We cannot understand how important it is.
The flames even spread to neighboring countries such as Peru, Bolivia, and some regions of Paraguay. Information obtained through NASA satellites, which constantly monitor the Amazon rainforest, showed that 2019 was the most active year in terms of fires since 2010. On the other side of the world, high temperatures were feeding another environmental disaster. By the end of 2019, shocking images were being broadcast. They came from Australia, where temperatures averaged 41 degrees Celsius and fueled voracious fires. The catastrophe began in spring, in a year classified as the hottest and driest in the country since records began. Satellite images showed the extent of the fires, which covered much of Australia. More than 52,000 square kilometers were engulfed by the flames, which released more than 400 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. The smoke from the fires polluted the air in the cities of Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, affecting millions of people. But according to the University of Sydney, it was the wildlife that suffered the most. The science faculty of this institution estimated that 1 billion animals were killed by the fires. Scientists were worried about the high temperatures recorded in 2019, which started fires around the planet. Most of them agreed that these temperatures were the product of climate change, a crisis which has been insufficiently tackled and whose effects are becoming increasingly devastating. While the world's forests were burning, in Paris, Notre Dame's cathedral was being swallowed by flames consuming centuries of history. By mid-2019, according to the UN Refugee Agency, more than 4.7 million Venezuelans had migrated from their country. This was an exodus considered the largest in recent South American history. In New York, El Chapo Guzman was sentenced to life in prison. The season finale of the Game of Thrones television series brought the world to a halt. In London, Julian Assange was finally arrested after 7 years of asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. Egan Bernal became the first Colombian to win the Tour de France and the youngest cyclist to achieve that title since 1909. And the film Avengers Endgame ranked as the highest grossing film of all time. Back in timeline of the century, a virus threatens the health of humanity. and the death of Iran's most powerful military man. For most of the planet, the city of Wuhan in China was little known. But from January 2020, it made headlines around the world. Wuhan, with more than 11 million inhabitants, is one of the most densely populated cities in China. It is the largest city in the central region of the Asian giant. It is also considered the transport capital due to its strategic location, which allows it to interconnect 9 provinces in China through rail networks. Wuhan is home to the wholesale fish and seafood market, which is visited by hundreds of thousands of people daily in search of food, which ranges from the most traditional to the most exotic. On the morning of January 1st, 2020, the market was closed. The reason? This place was suspected to be the epicenter of the outbreak of a mysterious and fearsome virus. On December 31st, 2019, Chinese authorities informed the World Health Organization that 41 people had been diagnosed with an unknown virus, and 7 of them were in a critical condition. The clinical signs and symptoms reported in the patients were the same: fever, a shortness of breath, and severely affected lungs. A retrospective investigation was initiated, which revealed that the patients had something else in common too. Most of them were workers at the Wuhan wholesale fish and seafood market, or regular visitors to the site. On the 7th of January, the first test by the Chinese authorities confirmed that it was a new coronavirus that could affect humans and animals. It was highly contagious. Days later, a 61-year-old man became the first fatality of the coronavirus. Throughout January 2020, the authorities, with the advice of the World Health Organization, intensified studies to determine the origin and lethality of the virus. But while this was happening, infection rates were on the rise, and cases were starting to be reported in nearby cities. Wuhan's travel networks with the rest of the country played in favor of the virus. On January the 22nd, Wuhan declared a temporary closure of airports and train stations. The measure impacted millions of people, but it was too late. 17 people had died, and China reported over 547 infections. Fear spread as fast as the virus. Wuhan and other neighboring cities were the first in the world to experience a lockdown.
From a public health point of view, early detection, isolation, so that you prevent transmission is always the key. That's how SARS was controlled back in 2003.
In an attempt to contain the infection, public transportation was brought to a halt. Most shops and businesses closed, and authorities advised people to stay home. But despite the measures, the numbers kept rising, and hospitals could not cope. By the end of January, the authorities in Wuhan ordered the construction of a hospital with about 1,000 beds to deal with the emergency. The work was completed within days. With more than 9,600 reported infections and 170 deaths, on January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a public health emergency of international importance. 11 years after the H1N1 virus, the second pandemic of the new millennium was just beginning. However, concern about the pandemic was negligible for the United States, which was focused on carrying out a shocking military operation in Iraq. Being on America's most wanted terrorist list means you are not safe anywhere. Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most important general, knew this very well. But an oversight cost him his life. On January 3rd, 2020, Soleimani and a group of his assistants landed at Baghdad airport in Iraq. After they boarded two vehicles, they were hit by several high-precision missiles fired from a drone.
Qasem Soleimani has been killed and his bloody rampage is now forever gone.
Soleimani had been the architect of the Quds Force for 20 years. Under his leadership, this organization became a powerful paramilitary arm of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, considered by the United States to be a terrorist group. After his assassination, thousands of Iranians mourned his death and called for revenge. The response was imminent. 5 days after his death, in the early morning of Wednesday, January the 8th, Iran launched a missile counterattack, causing damage to a US airbase in Iraq, injuring 34 soldiers. But the tragedy continued. Iran's Aerospace Force commander, Amir Ali Hajizadeh, had 10 seconds to decide whether what he saw on the radar was a missile or a plane. He made the wrong call. 176 people on board flight PS752 to Ukraine died because of his mistake. Soleimani's assassination meant a further break in the already difficult relationship between Iran and the United States. Since the events of January 2020, tension between the two nations has remained at very high levels, threatening peace in the region and around the world. The world did not stop in the following months, and it continued to surprise us with other events. In Jakarta, Indonesia, torrential rains caused flooding in several areas and left about 20,000 people displaced. The price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate oil plummeted in the markets to a negative $37.63. In Ukraine, severe forest fires were recorded in the Chernobyl exclusion zone 34 years after the worst nuclear disaster in history. Back in timeline of the century, we will remember the tragic death of a sports idol and the spread of the coronavirus to the rest of the world. On January 26, 2020, the Los Angeles County Fire Department in the United States reported a helicopter crash in the Calabasas mountain area. Soon, the news shocked the world. None of the 9 crew members managed to survive. Among the victims were basketball legend Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter Gianna. Basketball had lost one of its biggest stars. Bryant was a 5-time champion with the Los Angeles Lakers, a team with which he played 20 seasons in the NBA. Throughout his career, Kobe achieved great feats and numerous awards that made him a basketball hero.
If I had to pick what player right now represents the future, it would have to be Kobe Bryant with the way that he plays the game of basketball.
He retired as one of the greatest scorers in history, even ahead of Michael Jordan. After his death, athletes, politicians, and millions of fans around the world joined his family's grief. A tribute in his memory was organized at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, with the presence of family, friends, and NBA stars. Kobe revolutionized basketball and inspired many. As the world said goodbye to Kobe Bryant, the coronavirus was rapidly spreading across 5 continents. The first case of coronavirus outside China was reported in Thailand on January 13, 2020. The second case appeared in Japan. 8 days later, the first case was reported in the United States. They had returned from Wuhan before showing symptoms. On the 24th of January, France reported the first 3 cases in Europe. The next day, the disease was already in Australia. In just days, the world had over 1,000 cases. Amidst the uncontrollable advance of the virus, Donald Trump's administration in the United States announced that it would deny entry to foreigners who had traveled to China in the last 2 weeks. A few days later, on February the 4th, Japan announced that 10 people aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship docked in Yokohama were infected with the coronavirus. The boat, carrying about 3,700 people, was put into isolation. On the 11th of February 2020, the World Health Organization named the virus with a new code: COVID-19. By February the 14th, the epidemic reached Africa through Egypt, and on February the 26th, it reached Latin America, with the first case in Brazil. By the end of February, there were more than 80,000 cases worldwide. The World Health Organization raised the risk of spread to a very high level and urged governments around the world to take all necessary measures to be prepared for the arrival of the virus. On March 27th, UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson was diagnosed with coronavirus, making him one of the first world leaders to contract the disease. Drastic measures were taken in most countries. Suspension of events, closure of public spaces, and even curfews became the norm. Fear and uncertainty took hold of the crowds. Many feared running out of food or medicine, and a wave of panic buying was generated. Masks, alcohol, and disinfectants became essential. On March the 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization officially declared it a pandemic, and the name COVID-19 entered history.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
By then, Europe had become the main epicenter, with more cases and deaths than the rest of the world, except for China. Tragedy was in the streets. The planet already had over 2 million reported infections. The fear was real. Soon, the chilling images of deserted cities, as if frozen in time, became increasingly common. In early April, the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the pandemic originated, lifted the strict isolation measures that had kept its 11 million inhabitants confined for 11 weeks. Countries such as Italy, Spain, and France began to relax their restrictions too. However, South Korea, one of the countries that successfully contained the spread, recorded new peaks on May the 10th. The United States was the first country to reach 100,000 deaths and quickly became the most affected country on the planet. To the south, Brazil had the second highest number of deaths in the world. Chile, Peru, and Mexico, with more than 330,000 cases, positioned Latin America as the new epicenter of the pandemic. By July 23rd, there were about 15.3 million COVID-19 infections, leaving more than 625,000 fatalities in its wake. Despite the decline in cases in some countries, the World Health Organization warned of a possible second wave of infection. Other events that happened during the first months of 2020 were Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Dukes of Sussex, announced their separation from the British Crown. The United Kingdom was negotiating its new relationship with the European Union. The Korean film Parasite, which won 4 Oscars, made history by becoming the first non-English language film to win Best Picture. Back in timeline of the century, COVID-19 is shaking up the world economy, and racial conflicts in the United States spark violence. In addition to causing thousands of deaths, the spread of COVID-19 dealt a severe blow to the global economy. Across 5 continents, pandemic confinements caused businesses to close and millions of people to stay home for weeks at a time. The global economy entered a surprising state of suspense.
Well, it is the worst crisis since the Great Depression, but it is more than that, because it is a combination of a health crisis and an economic shock.
The economic meltdown became increasingly noticeable. Emerging market economies suffered capital outflows. Entire industries stopped. There was a collapse in the demand for commodities, unemployment rates rose, and global trade fell.
We're going to be in a prolonged depression. That will be very harmful to the quality of life. It will cause great hardship for many people, especially poor people.
The effects of the economic recession generated by the COVID-19 pandemic are still unpredictable. For the second quarter of 2020, the contraction of the global domestic product was severe. In the United States alone, the economy contracted by at least 32%, the most severe decline in its history since 1947. Many companies turned to the digital world and home delivery. In just a few months, the entire planet became much more dependent on technology in one of the fastest cultural changes in history. Video conferences, both for work and to socialize, revolutionized the way we communicate with each other. Remote working became commonplace. The world's student population switched from classrooms to online classes, raising concerns about the digital gap that would marginalize a high percentage of the world. The new normal is a reality. The outcome and extent of these future changes is yet to be seen. While COVID-19 threatened the world economy, racism reawakened the indignation of the world. On May 25, 2020, a racist act ended in tragedy with global knock-on effects. A Minneapolis police officer killed an African-American citizen in collusion with other officers. George Floyd's name was added to a list of people who have been victims of violence because of their skin color. Old wounds reopened. Officers Derek Chauvin, J. Alexander Keung, Thomas Lane, and To Tao were the police officers involved in Floyd's murder. The event made Floyd an icon in the fight against racism. A wave of protests demanding equality and justice broke out in the United States. The demonstrators demanded immediate police reforms in several states. It was the largest wave of protest in the United States since the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. The Black Lives Matter slogan resonated strongly both in the United States and in many parts of the world. Former police officer Derek Chauvin, the main culprit in Floyd's death, was brought to justice on charges of second-degree murder. The other former officers involved in the crime were charged with aiding and abetting. The political implications of the event, months away from the US presidential election, were unpredictable. Only time will tell whether the murder of George Floyd will mean a real awakening of Americans to the problem of racism. These events also occurred in 2020. The Xinjia Hotel in China, where people infected with COVID-19 were isolated, collapsed, leaving at least 10 dead. Pope Francis gave the Urbi et Orbi blessing in an empty Plaza San Pedro due to the pandemic. Musicians from all over the world joined forces for the One World Together at Home concert to send a message of hope. Back in timeline of the century. Despite the pandemic, history was still being written. This time outside the borders of the Earth. On May 30th, 2020, SpaceX, together with NASA, successfully achieved a dream that took years to come true. The name Elon Musk was written in history. This is Sputnik, the first artificial satellite in history to reach Earth's orbit. In 1957, the success of this mission was a triumph for the human race and for the then Soviet Union. During the Cold War, that satellite was understood to be the beginning of a new phase of the arms race, in which the Americans and the Soviets fought over strategic control of outer space. It was only a matter of time before one of the two countries would reach the goal. Our natural satellite, the Moon. Over the years, the Cold War between nations became a thing of the past. The new stage of the space race would be between corporations. It was that spirit of adventure that the first astronauts had, which inspired eccentric billionaire Elon Musk to venture out in 2002 with an initiative to dominate space. Its name? SpaceX, a private aerospace travel company. For Musk, who was obsessed with the conquest of Mars, SpaceX meant the possibility of making his dreams come true. It's estimated that the entrepreneur has invested around $100 million in the project.
This human spaceflight is the reason that SpaceX was created. and we're incredibly honored to partner with NASA.
On May 30th, 2020, the big opportunity came for Musk and SpaceX to make history. The first attempt was suspended due to bad weather, but eventually the Falcon 9 rocket with the Crew Dragon capsule attached successfully launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, an event that had not happened since 2011. Nearly 10 million people followed the launch live. The astronauts on board, Bob Behnken of the Air Force and Marine Doug Hurley, had a 19-hour journey ahead of them. SpaceX became the first private company in human history to successfully bring a crew of NASA astronauts to the International Space Station. For Musk, the feat made his dream come true, and he wrote on his online journal that the next steps to be taken were to start a new era in the conquest of the universe. The world continued to move forward in 2020, and the news kept surprising us. A man in Nova Scotia, Canada, was involved in one of the bloodiest shootings in the last 30 years of the country, leaving at least 23 people dead. In Indonesia, the Krakatoa volcano erupted. Democrat Bernie Sanders announced his withdrawal from the primary elections, clearing the way for Joe Biden to compete against Donald Trump in the US presidential race. The emergency of COVID-19 continued. However, spirits were high as some elderly people managed to defeat the virus. Serenades on balconies and applauses for the heroes of the pandemic spread around the world. A devastating explosion occurred in the port of Beirut in Lebanon, causing extensive material damage and leaving hundreds dead and thousands injured. Back in timeline of the century, although some victories had been achieved, scientists continued their work in trying to end the pandemic. The search for a way out of the COVID-19 pandemic is underway. In January 2020, Chinese scientists published the COVID-19 genome. It's believed that the virus had come from bats, and that it may have passed to humans through contact with an intermediary animal known as the pangolin. The race to find a cure began. Studies were conducted with existing components such as hydroxychloroquine, but after a few months, its effectiveness was questioned. Medications like remdesivir proved effective in critical cases and gave the world a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. In March, China claimed to have a vaccine ready for testing in humans without specifying when testing would begin. By early April, according to the World Health Organization, more than 60 teams of scientists from around the world were looking for a solution.
Healthy volunteers, and we will inoculate them with a version of the human coronavirus, follow their disease time course, and then return them to healthy.
By July, several research projects were in the human testing phase. Specialists have established that the estimated time for a vaccine to become widely available is about 12 to 18 months. However, tests by some labs showed promising results and even predicted that September 2020 could be a possible date for the vaccine to finally be ready. In the face of the pandemic, the role of the World Health Organization has received both praise and strong criticism. Donald Trump ended the United States' relationship with the organization, and Brazil has threatened to follow its footsteps. The end of this tragedy is in the hands of scientists. However, it also lies in the behavior of humanity, who have come to understand that the world we knew and enjoyed changed forever. We live in what is known as the new normal. Adapting to it will be necessary. COVID-19 threatened the human race, but initiated solidarity. During the pandemic, there were unprecedented agreements of collaboration and assistance between nations. The awareness of the need for a change in our lifestyle was global. Help and responsibility among people became the norm. Consumerism, work, learning, and even the way we relate to each other began to transform. Our future in defeating COVID-19 lies within each of us. In these last 20 years of our history, the human race has won and lost battles. We witnessed the passage of time. We transformed. We built. We destroyed. We shaped our environment. We witnessed groundbreaking technological advances, sporting feats, natural disasters, wars and news that defined our present and allowed us to imagine the future.
It is time for a change.